My cruel sister let her Pitbull maul my disabled son, then sneered, well, maybe he shouldn't have been crawling. She blamed us. So I fed the bloodied collar to the fire ants. And left behind something that made her scream like she'd been bitten. I'm Odellis. My sister let her Pitbull maul my disabled son, then looked me dead in the eye and said, well, maybe he shouldn't have been crawling around like that. No apology. No guilt. Just that smirk like she enjoyed watching him bleed. And the worst part, she didn't act alone. The whole neighborhood stood silent. My family called me reckless. They erased his photo from the wall and invited reporters to a charity gala for children in wheelchairs without even inviting the child they'd nearly killed. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just fed the collar, still stained with his blood, into a fire anthill, and left behind something that made her scream like she was the one bitten next. Before we begin, where are you listening from tonight? And what would you have done if this was your child? Let's dive in. It was the first warm morning in weeks, the kind where dew clung to the grass just long enough to shimmer, but not soak your sneakers. I stood on my porch cradling a chipped mug, steam curling over my knuckles. From across the yard, Jeremiah's laughter drifted up, a soft stuttering rhythm that filled the silence better than any bird call. He was tracing stars with sidewalk chalk, big blue bursts along the pavement, some crooked, some bold. He liked to draw them in trails, like they were guiding his wheelchair toward another planet. That morning I'd let him go out on his own for the first time. It wasn't really alone. I was right there pretending to sip my coffee while my eyes tracked every inch of him. His chair was something I'd stayed up nights fixing, reinforced wheels, stabilized turning bar, and brakes that could stop on a dime. I'd learned more from YouTube tutorials than I had from any pediatric rehab nurse. Jeremiah didn't know that. He just called it Starship One. He stopped to wave at me. That gap-toothed grin of his almost made me forget the world outside our little rental was cruel. I waved back, keeping my smile small, steady. And then I heard it. Get that thing off my grass. The voice shot out like a bullet, sharp and smug. Volra. I didn't even need to look to know. I turned just as her garden gate clanged open. She stood like she always did, arms folded across her HOA badge polo, sunglasses perched even though the sun was barely out, and in her hand a ceramic garden brick, the kind with fake butterflies glazed on. Volra, I started, stepping off the porch. Don't, but her arm was already up. The brick sailed. I watched it fly, slow at first, like time hiccuped, then fast. It cracked against Jeremiah's temple. The sound it made wasn't like in movies. It was dull, soft, like the sound a watermelon makes when it's dropped wrong. He didn't scream, not right away. The chair jerked, the chalk scattered, then he whimpered, tiny at first, then loud, wild. I dropped the mug, heard it shatter but didn't care. Valera's fence yawned open wider, and then I saw the Pitbull. No leash, no warning, just muscle and speed and teeth. The dog bolted across the lawn. No bark, no pause, straight at Jeremiah. My legs moved before thought caught up. I sprinted. A rusted garden spade, someone's forgotten tool, lay propped against a neighbor's fence. I grabbed it mid-run, metal scraping skin. The Pitbull lunged. It hit the chair like a freight train. Jeremiah's tiny frame crumpled. The chair tilted. His scream pierced. Something inside me I didn't know could break. The dog latched onto his shirt. No. His stomach. Blood-stained fabric instantly. I swung. The spade struck the dog's skull with a wet crack. It yelped, staggered. I swung again, lower. Its ribs, it snarled, backing away, but not gone. Its mouth still foamed. Its eyes still burned. I stepped between them. Breathing like fire was stuck in my throat. Jeremiah was curled, whispering my name. Blood ran down his side. His arms gripped the chair's handles like they were lifelines. And Volra? She walked out slowly, wedge heels clicking like applause. You people never learn, she sneered. I told you, HOA policy. That thing shouldn't be crawling around without registration. The dog was doing its job. I stared at her. Words sat heavy in my mouth. I wanted to scream, to shove her, to throw the spade, but I didn't. I turned and knelt beside my son. Paramedics came finally after someone down the block dialed 911. Not Volra. Not any of the neighbors watching from behind curtains. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody helped. I rode in the ambulance, Jeremiah's hand in mine. Still trembling. Still silent. That night there was an emergency family dinner. I don't know why I went. Maybe I thought someone, anyone, would ask how he was doing. Maybe I hoped our mother would wrap her arms around me and say, I'm sorry. But when I walked in, Volra was already seated at the head of the table. Fresh blowout, lipstick perfect. She had that smile, the one she wore whenever she knew she could get away with something vile. The truth is, she said over wine and roasted chicken, O'Dolly's left him unattended. That's negligence. Dad nodded slowly, like she'd just solved a puzzle. You can't expect the neighborhood to bend around your situation, he added, not looking at me. I blinked. My situation? Volra dabbed her mouth with a cloth napkin. We all warned you not to isolate him too much. And now this. No one mentioned the brick or the dog. No one asked about the blood, about the screams. Just Volra. Polished, calm, celebrated, sitting like she had done the world a favor by telling the truth. I sat quiet, fork untouched. Jeremiah's hospital bracelet still around my wrist. Always the helper, the youngest, the one told to stop being so emotional. But now I knew, if I didn't speak, they'd erase him too. Later, after the dinner ended and everyone hugged Volra for her grace under pressure, I stood outside the apartment. Animal control had returned the collar, still red, still warm when I picked it up, like it remembered. I held it in my palm. Didn't cry. Didn't blink. Just stared. Not even as I opened the kitchen drawer and slid the sealed plastic bag inside. The blood-stained collar made a soft sound against the wood, too soft for what it represented. I pushed the drawer shut slowly. The click echoed in the quiet room. Jeremiah was curled on the couch, tucked beneath his favorite space-themed blanket. He hadn't spoken since the ambulance ride. Not a word. No giggle. No question. Not even his usual morning, Mama? His body rocked ever so gently, forward and back, like a pendulum too tired to stop. In his arms was the astronaut plushie he used to take to preschool every day. I hadn't seen that toy in months. He used to little made-up tunes while he built rocket ships out of cereal boxes or traced stars in chalk. But now the house had gone quiet in a way I didn't know how to fix. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It pressed on your chest, made your own breath feel like it was intruding. 3 days passed like that. Mornings were a routine of gingerly helping him eat, if he ate at all, and checking the bruises under his bandages. The wounds were healing slower than I'd hoped, but what worried me more was the way his eyes never met mine. He looked through me like I wasn't there. Then came the envelope. I spotted it as soon as I stepped outside to take out the trash, a paper folded and taped directly to our mailbox, not mailed, hand-delivered. I peeled it off and read it once. Then again, notice of violation subject. Unregistered motorized equipment on common grounds. Fine. $200 signed. Volra Ashcroft, HOA president. I stared at the paper, my hands starting to shake. It wasn't about his wheelchair, not really. It was control. They weren't content with seeing my son bleeding on the lawn. Now they wanted to fine him for being there at all. I folded the notice slowly, pressed it into my pocket, and looked across the cul-de-sac. Curtains fluttered. Someone was watching, but no one waved. Not a soul had come to check in. I texted my mother, "Are you serious? They fined us for the chair." Her reply came within minutes. "Stop making this a thing. Volra's doing her best." Her best? Her best was throwing a brick at a child? I didn't reply. I didn't trust what I might say next. That night I made grilled cheese, Jeremiah's comfort food. I cut the crusts off the way he liked, but when I carried the plate over, he was already on the floor, curled near the foot of the couch. The collar, he had it. At some point during the day, he must have opened the drawer. The plastic was gone. The leather loop was wrapped loosely in his hands, fingers weaving through it like it was a security blanket. "Jeremiah," I whispered, crouching beside him. "Honey, let's not sleep with that." He flinched just a little, but didn't pull away. I reached toward the collar gently. That's when he spoke. Just 2 words. "He remembers me." His voice was raw, like it hurt to speak. I froze, afraid to move too quickly. "He remembers me," he repeated quieter this time, eyes fixed on the collar. I didn't take it from him. I just sat on the floor beside him until he fell asleep. Later, alone with my thoughts, I found myself thinking of Volra again. We were kids once. I couldn't have been older than 8. I'd come home crying after school because a group of girls had cornered me in the bathroom and dumped my backpack into the toilet. When I told Volra, all she said was, "If you cry, they win. Just be quiet." That line stuck with me. Like a stone in my shoe, I never got rid of. I'd carried that lesson all through adolescence. Quiet meant safe. Quiet meant survival. Now I watched my son choose silence too, not because it healed, but because it protected. The next morning I noticed something else. The chalk stars were gone. The sidewalk where Jeremiah had drawn his constellations had been pressure washed clean. There was no HOA notice, no warning, just wet concrete and the faint smell of bleach. I stood there in my robe, gripping my coffee so hard the ceramic creaked. Then I looked up. Across the street, mounted neatly on the corner post, was a new surveillance camera. It faced our driveway directly. I stared at the little red light blinking at me. The lens unmoving, unblinking, watching. I turned, walked back inside, and locked the door behind me. That night, I didn't scroll through my phone like usual. I didn't binge my way through a mindless show. I opened my journal, the one I kept buried in the closet behind last year's taxes, and I wrote one sentence. If no one will speak for him, I will. I tore the page out, folded it, and tucked it into my purse. Then I added the collar. Tomorrow, I'd walk into the HOA office, and I wouldn't be quiet. The next morning I didn't bother knocking. I walked into the HOA office with the same certainty you'd carry into a courtroom with facts in one hand and grief in the other. Volra was seated behind the front desk, typing something, her polished nails clacking steadily against the keyboard. The walls around her were lined with bland certificates of community excellence and photos from past HOA events, barbecues, bake-offs, ribbon cuttings. I crossed the room, didn't speak, and laid the sealed bag with the collar on her desk like a piece of evidence, because that's exactly what it was. She didn't flinch, didn't look up, just let a slow smile spread across her face like she was rehearsing it. "Morning," she said lightly, still typing. Then she tapped the bag with her pen twice, like it was nothing more than a paperweight. "So dramatic," she finally said, her eyes flicking to mine. "Odalis, this isn't a courtroom. This is a neighborhood. We don't need to keep weaponizing our trauma." She opened the side drawer with a manicured hand and slid the bag inside without a second glance. Like it was a nuisance she'd file away under sentimental trash. I didn't speak. A man in a collared HOA vest stood behind her watching. One of the board members. "George, maybe." He blinked slowly, then looked away when I turned to him. I stood there for a few more seconds, long enough to feel the weight of what I wasn't saying pressing against the roof of my mouth. Then I turned and walked out. Back in the car, I gripped the wheel for a long while before even starting the engine. I didn't have words left in me, just a low in my chest that felt dangerously close to rage. That evening, I brought Jeremiah to my mother's house. I didn't want to, but she'd texted 3 times asking to check in and saying how the whole thing had looked bad to outsiders. We stepped into the foyer, and the smell of lemon cleaner hit me like a punch. Her house always smelled like that, pristine and polished and hollow. Jeremiah trailed behind me, silent, holding his astronaut. As we walked past the hall leading to the kitchen, I stopped. My eyes landed on the gallery wall, the family wall. Framed photographs lined the paneling from waist to ceiling. Grandkids in cap and gown, birthday hats, church dresses. Valera's twins had 6 pictures each. Even my cousin Loretta's newborn was up there, though he hadn't even hit 6 months. But Jeremiah? Gone. I moved closer. The spot where his picture used to be, him in his astronaut Halloween costume from 2 years ago, was empty. No, not empty, replaced. In the silver frame was a different child. A little girl in a ballet tutu, mid-spin, smiling wide. I stared at it, unsure if I was hallucinating. "Mom?" I called into the kitchen. She walked out, wiping her hands on a towel, her hair pinned back like always. She glanced at me, then followed my eyes to the photo. "Oh," she said, like I was pointing out a crooked lamp. "That's Layla, Volra's friend's daughter. Isn't she adorable?" I didn't answer. "I had to take Jeremiah's photo down," she continued, voice lower now. "We've had visitors lately and, well, it makes people uncomfortable to see him like that after the incident. You understand? Uncomfortable. That was the word she chose. Like my child was a bad smell. "I understand perfectly," I said, voice steady, too steady. Back home, I didn't speak during dinner. Jeremiah barely touched his food. He just stared out the window as if the answers to everything were written in the dark. That weekend, the HOA hosted a community safety gala. It was all over the neighborhood bulletin. A catered event, silent auction, a brief keynote by the HOA president herself. Volra. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway. Jeremiah and I stood outside the event center, just off the sidewalk near the side entrance. It was a warm evening, and the glass doors reflected strings of lights and polished shoes. Inside, I could hear the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter. Valera's voice rang through the speaker system. Confident, polished, rehearsed. "We're here tonight because we care about the future," she said, "because we believe in protecting the vulnerable." I felt Jeremiah tense beside me. "And with our new accessibility upgrades," Volra continued, "we are building a neighborhood where everyone, no matter their circumstances, feels included." There was a pause, then a flourish of music, and from the left side of the stage they wheeled in a child in a wheelchair, not Jeremiah, a girl, maybe 8, dressed in a perfect cardigan and pastel skirt, a model. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. Volra placed her hand on the girl's shoulder and smiled wide for the press. I looked down at Jeremiah. He was motionless, eyes glued to the scene through the window. He didn't speak. I couldn't either. That night, after I tucked him into bed, he asked for his chalk. He hadn't touched it since the stars were washed away. He went out to the driveway and drew a single 5-point star. Then he stopped, stared at it like he was waiting for it to disappear again. She erased me. He whispered. I sat on the porch steps. My breath caught in my throat. He wasn't talking about the chalk. He was talking about all of it. Volra. The photo wall. The fake child in a borrowed chair. The silence. That night, when the house was quiet again, I went to the drawer and pulled the collar out one more time. I grabbed an envelope and with a pen that shook in my grip wrote down 3 names. Not the police, people who actually fight. The collar sat on the kitchen table beside the envelope with 3 names underlined in thick blue ink. I stared at them, each one carved from memory and silence. Then I reached for my phone and made the first call. Marcus Hale answered on the 3rd ring. He didn't say hello, just let out a tired breath and said, "Oh Dallas, I need you to hear something," I replied, pacing near the window where the light hadn't yet broken through. I told him everything. The attack, the silence, the photo wall, the gala. I spoke the way you do when holding your breath too long. Steady, low, like if I raised my voice, it might all break apart. Marcus didn't interrupt once. When I finally stopped, he waited a beat and asked, "Was the attack direct or did it hesitate?" I looked over at the sealed bag again. "It didn't bark," I said. "Didn't circle, didn't sniff, it ran, locked eyes and lunged like it had a target. No confusion, no pause, just aimed." There was no hesitation in his response. "That's training," he said. "No family dog does that unless it's been shown how." I swallowed the taste of metal in the back of my mouth, so it wasn't an accident. It was a command. And with that, the pieces began lining up. Not perfectly, but enough that the fog started to lift, enough that I felt seen. The next morning, I poured coffee while Jeremiah sat at the table, moving a spoon in circles around dry cereal. He hadn't touched the milk. I walked to the front door expecting the usual HOA flyer about garbage pickup delays or seasonal yard tips, but what greeted me made my stomach pitch. A new sign had been planted in our front lawn. Whiteboard, red letters, mobility impaired units must register or relocate. Below it, spray painted in red, "This isn't a circus." I stood there, barefoot in the dew, staring at the words like they were fire. Behind me, Jeremiah stepped up to the window. He didn't say anything, just stared. Then slowly, he turned and walked back down the hall. His footsteps were light, but his silence hit like thunder. I found the chalk basket in the hallway an hour later. Tucked behind the coat closet, he'd hidden it himself. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body was tired, but my mind was moving like a freight train without brakes. At 3 a.m., I got in the car and drove across the neighborhood to the maintenance shed, tucked just behind the HOA tennis courts. I'd seen the keypad before but never paid attention to it. I knew Volra, and I knew her birthday. The code was 1124. It beeped green. Inside the shed smelled like bleach and rust. Bins of seasonal decorations lined one wall. Stacked fines and warning slips covered a work table. Fertilizer bags sat slumped like corpses in a corner, but what caught my eye was the old filing cabinet in the back. One drawer was labeled in thick black marker, "Board only." I hesitated, then opened it. Inside were folders, some dust-covered, others fresh and sharp. I flipped through them until one label stopped me cold. K9 Integration Pilot, Internal. The first few pages were bland, meeting notes, cost estimates, generic charts, but then photos of mannequins, human-shaped dummies, some seated in wheelchairs, torn apart, limbs chewed, fabric shredded, training logs, schedules, all with the same initials scribbled at the top, VA, Volra Ashcroft. The last page broke me. It was a timeline, handwritten. Phase 1, conditioning. Phase 2, simulation. Real-world trial, passive target, common area, passive target. They meant Jeremiah. They treated my son like a test subject, a checkbox. By the time I left the shed, it was nearly 5. At home, I cleared the dining table. Jeremiah was still asleep. I laid out every document, scanned each page, sorted them by type, highlighted dates. I didn't cry. I wrote, typed, cross-referenced names and signatures. Then I opened a blank document and began drafting. How your dues train a weapon, what the HOA doesn't want you to know. It wasn't polished, but it was real. I kept it anonymous. No name, no address, just truth. At 4 a.m., I printed 20 copies, slipped on a hoodie, and walked street by street, mailbox to mailbox, sliding each flyer in like a confession sealed in an envelope. The street was quiet. Sprinklers ticking in the distance. A raccoon scurried across a yard 2 doors down. As I made my way back home, I passed the sign again. The red spray paint still burned beneath the porch light. I didn't tear it down. Not yet. It was going to make the perfect closing slide. By mid-morning, I'd showered, dressed, and reheated old coffee, mostly because I needed something to hold. The pot hadn't even cooled when my phone started buzzing. First, A text from Paula. You didn't get this from me, but keep pushing. We're seeing it. Then another and another. Not angry messages, not even